We now move on to the next part of the symposium, our next conversation that we are going to have with Mr. Deepak Satwalekar. You're very welcome to join us on stage. Okay, while he joins us, while he gets ready, I'd like to share the latest question on the live poll if you're all hooked on to the event app. And if you have been interactive enough, the first question that went up was clean energy technology supported by Log9 uses which of the following as fuels? And the first question has been put on the app. You're free to please participate. It is an interactive app, so your inputs are welcome. The next question, do you think Mahindra should have gone to build airplanes from scratch with participation from NAL? Your answers welcome. We are in conversation with Mr. Deepak Satwalekar. He's a man with a lot of experience in the industry. I am not going to read out what is already mentioned in the app about him. Of course, I can only say that he has an admirable list of achievements. And with the positions held in the industry, he has a lot of experience to share. He's been an advisor on several boards. He's, of course, been an IIT Bombay alumnus. He's received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Institute. But to make his contribution to our symposium even more relevant, after all the experience, is what he has to share with what he's been involved in over the past few years, essentially the primary education space. I did meet with him a couple of months ago, and we had an interesting conversation. He spoke of some very, very interesting, let's say, activities that he's been involved with. And the questions, the conversation that we're going to have is going to be based along those lines. Could we, yep. So he's been part of a foundation called the Gyan Prakash Foundation. I'm sure you'll tell us more about it, if we can start with, and then maybe I can ask you more on that.
Start about, okay.
The Gyan Prakash Foundation, what the Gyan Prakash Foundation is, and how is it that you have been involved with it?
Okay. But before I get into education, I need to make a comment on something that Hemant said. He said that IIT Bombay and IIT Delhi are not in the same class. And I agree with him. And that's what I love about IIT Delhi. They have aspirations to catch up with us. Okay? So it's always good to have ambition. Okay. But having said that, let me give you just a brief idea on what Gyan Prakash Foundation is. Because I think when I took retirement, I said the one thing which has contributed to whatever I am today has been the opportunity of getting educated. And therefore I said, when I have to give back to society, it's going to be in the education space. And so therefore the concentration of my effort has been in the primary education space, either in rural India or for the economically disadvantaged communities in urban India. And that's where I focus. And Gyan Prakash is one such example of what we are doing. We started off in a 2-classroom setting in Pune, and then moved on from there to rural areas outside Pune. And now the government has asked us to work in 4 districts. I'll come back to that. We have decided to work in 2 districts and are trying to transform how education gets imparted through the government schools. Because one of the hobbies that everybody has is to hammer up government schools and government teachers. And I think my experience over the last 5 years in interacting with teachers from the government schools has been completely different. They're as passionate, they're as committed. Let's remember the environment in which they operate also. Because the general accusation is that they're never in the classroom, they're outside. Sure, they're outside, but that's because they're taking census, they're on census duty, they're on election duty, and all of the other things which they're asked to do. So let's not blame them for what they've not been able to do fully. Okay?
So you have been working with the government, and you are now, you of course are saying that um, much as, I mean, what most people think is the government is an adversary and we shouldn't be taking them that way, we should be taking them on our side. Um, how has, I mean, you've been working with them for the past, how many years now?
7 years.
7 years. Has it been uniform, the kind of give and take?
Okay. I think first things first, I mean, the statement that the government is an adversary, I have a major difference of opinion on that. Okay? On a lighter note, it's basically if the government had done everything that they were supposed to do, and that is a big if, okay? All the people sitting in this room here who are trying to come up with solutions would be jobless, okay? You'd have nothing to solve because the government has already taken care of primary education, they've taken care of primary health care, they've taken care of transportation, they've done it all. So what would we all do? So let's be grateful that the government is not as efficient as they should be, okay? It gives us opportunities. So the point I'm making is, I think it's easy to sit on one side of the table and blame the other side. Let's not blame, let's try and understand why they do what they do and why they don't do what they should be doing, and then come up with ways of working together. Is the government system of working different from an NGO or the corporate? Absolutely, it's chalk and cheese, okay? But does it mean that it's oil and water, that the two can't mix? Not really so. And as long as we are not trying to score brownie points, as long as we keep in mind what the end objective is, the process can be worked out. The end objective is what? That our children should get educated. How does it happen is, I think, in our hands. Let's also remember that no NGO has unlimited resources available to them. The government has a lot of resources. Unfortunately, they don't spend it on the software, they prefer to spend it on the hardware for whatever reasons they have. And therefore, you'll have government schools spread across the country. Now, if you don't want to work with the government, you need to go and set up another school in all those rural areas or wherever you want to work with. And why would you want to waste your money on that when there's something available? So find a way of working with them. They've made the investment. Similar thing with healthcare. There are primary healthcare centers. Maybe they don't have doctors. So don't blame them. Provide the doctors. So there are ways in which we can work with the government. And I think we just need to find ways to do it. Has the journey been smooth? Much as I would love to say it's been difficult, I think in Gyan Prakash, our expectations were set in a manner where we were not saying by next quarter the government has to deliver. We didn't go and tell them what they need to do, because that's the last thing a bureaucrat wants to hear, is for you to come in from above and give Gyan. It doesn't work that way. You work with them at their pace. You make available information, you make available suggestions. It's for them to pick up what they think is a good idea, come back to you and tell you what a brilliant idea they have and why don't we use it. And I think it's a great thing, as long as we are not looking to be the owners of that idea. We just want the idea implemented. Whose idea it is really couldn't bother me. And I think that's what has worked for us, working with the government. Never, ever trying to put them down. That's about the worst thing you can do, okay? Because they have enough power to make sure that you cannot succeed. They have enough power because they have the power to say no, okay? Even to grant you an NGO approval, they can say no. To get you FCRA approval, you can say no. There are multiple ways, and then if nothing else works, then they'll say that as an NGO with a certain number of people working with you, you need to get shop and establishment registration, you need to do all, and believe me, it's impossible, okay? So I think working with the government, one way to say it, it's absolutely essential. Do you want to make your life easier and work with them and not treat them as adversaries? How you work with them is, I think, the key difference.
Yeah. So let me put it the other way. Do they take you as partners now?
I don't even want to be taken at par.
Not an adversary, I'm sure.
Adversary? No. But at par meaning saying I'm on the same level. And with all due respects, and I hope that I'm not treading on anyone's toes, and I think this is something my wife keeps telling me, please keep your legs, feet crossed, so you're unlikely to put it into your mouth. I know, but this is the advice my wife gave me, so I always sit with my feet crossed. Very easy not to put your foot in your mouth. But I think if we, as IITians, believe that we've descended from heaven to solve the world's problem, can you just imagine what an IAS officer thinks? Okay? They truly believe they have come from there. And the last thing you want to say is, I'm on par with you. No, I have no desire. All I want is the kids to get educated. If it means I say, yes, sir, I'm willing to say yes, sir. I think we need to be very clear what the end objective is. It's not to prove that I have a brilliant idea. It's just to get the child educated. Okay? So, I mean, it's never an adversarial relationship. It cannot work. Let's put that to bed.
Great. I am going to now move on. There are, of course, relevant questions, but like we've decided, we'll talk about them later. You have had experience with Teach for India. I must actually tell them that, about the interesting conversation we had about the first time we met. And Mr. Satwalekar, when I told him that our mandate for the symposium is, taking ideas to scale, to, and what are the various steps to take, challenges, the pluses, etc. And I know that he said that it's almost next to impossible, but yes, it can happen. So that's where we said that it would be a conversation. Bringing that back to perspective is what the next question is about. Your experience with Teach for India, right? And you said that there was a point where you didn't think that it would scale up, and then you did. So what happened?
Okay. I don't know if people are aware of what Teach for India is about. It's modeled on the Teach for America, where I think we bring in bright young kids, and we've got many who come from the IITs. They give 2 years of their life to become a fellow with us. We train them, and then we put them into a classroom. They're either in the government schools or into low-cost private schools in the slums. And they become class teachers. They give 2 years of their life. It's an extremely stressful place because they're spending close to 18 hours a day in the classroom, in the families, with the communities. Because often if you've got the girl child in the class, getting them to stay in the class is equally tough, which means you need an engagement with the community. So that's how it works. So that's what we did. When we set this up in 2008-9, our logo was that every child in India will get an excellent education. And that's what we wanted to do. Every child in India will get an excellent education. And the idea being that we would provide the fellows to go into the classroom and do that. But many of the schools would not permit more than 2 fellows, not more than 4 fellows, and so on and so forth. At some point in time, frustration set in, because we're now operating in 7 cities. We've so far got about 5,000 fellows through our system. We've done training for about 30,000 students whose lives we've been able to touch. But we're far away from every child. So when we had a relook at what our next scaling up thing is going to be, it's not going to be adding 1 million fellows. But we said, what are we doing? The end goal may be the child's education, but we are basically creating a set of leaders. The training that they get is not just academic training. They're trained to deal with humans. And I think that is the biggest challenge. They're dealing with the students, they're dealing with the community, they're dealing with the families, and all the challenges. And believe me, many of these fellows come from upper income societies. They have no idea. This may be the first time they went into a slum. Okay? So it's a game changer, it's a life changer for them. To be able to cope with that, my belief is they can cope with anything in their life if they do that. So what we said is now we've got 5,000 of these change agents out in the system. So scaling up does not mean Teach for India gets 1 million fellows. Scaling up means we need to help these guys set up an incubator and let these 5,000 people go loose in the system. Because when we started off, our hope was that at least a third of them would stay in the social sector. And I was hoping that at least 2/3 would go back to corporate India, become the Trojan horses out there and bring in some sanity in the corporate world so that they recognize something other than profit. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that 2/3 of them stay back in the social sector. So once they have been touched with what they've seen and experienced, they don't want that money part of it. They stay back. And it's not that 1/3 goes to the corporate sector. 20% of them really go on for higher education, and from there they come back into the social sector. Now, if we've got 5,000 change agents out there, and each one of them goes and replicates what we're doing, it works wonders, and it will work wonders. This is something we've started 2 years back. It's going to take time to implement. And many of them will say, I'm comfortable with education, so I'm going to do things about education. Some of them say, hey, listen, I came from this small town in Jharkhand. I want to go back there. But when I go back there, it's not just education, so it's not a vertical. I'll do the horizontal. And I will work with not just the education, but I'll work with primary health care, infant mortality, mother care, and all of those things which work so as to get the child to be healthy, to be able to come to the classroom, to be able to study. So I think this is the way we said we will scale, not the 1 million fellows. So there are ways and ways in which you can scale. So that's the...
So how do you then measure, because they come with different ideas, they come with different ideas of scaling. Mm-hmm. It's not quite the way you started out. And so if you have fellows giving you different ideas of how they'd want to, for example, the one that you mentioned about Jharkhand. I mean, if somebody, if there were 15, if there were 25 others who said different things, mm-hmm, and wanted to move in a parallel way, I mean, they did not have one approach. Mm-hmm. How do you then monitor? How do you then make it one system?
Okay, we don't monitor, okay? I think the idea is not that whatever we've done here is exactly what you do. If you spend 2 years with us, it's now ingrained in you. It's part of you. You go out as the ambassador. The other thing let's remember is that India is a pretty diverse country. You can't have one solution which will work in Jharkhand, which will work in rural Maharashtra, which will work in Tamil Nadu. Impossible. We are dealing with people. We're dealing with social customs. We're dealing with the local community. I think the ability that the core framework is given, it's not a uniform framework, but it will be sort of a unified framework. The rest of it is adaptation on the ground. You need to be able to adapt to the local environment, to the local conditions, to the local demand, and be able to deliver what they want. So I think that is the critical thing, which I think we've been able to impart to our fellows, the ability to think on your feet.
So you speak of adapting. So there may or may not be an adopting of that mm-hmm, throughout. Mm-hmm. Is that what you are saying?
I mean, I hate adopting. Because a lot of people will say that I went abroad, I saw this thing, and I'm coming to adopt it. Yeah, the circumstances here are very different from the circumstances there. You really can't adopt, but you can adapt. And that's what you need to do, is basically customize it to your requirements, customize it to the requirements of the community that you wish to serve. At the end of the day, please remember, it's not about you, it's about them. You're here to serve someone. And as long as you remember that all the time, it is not difficult to adapt.
As long as there's impact, that's
yeah.
Yes. I'd like to now have you speak about the setting up of those 7 English medium schools in Tamil Nadu. So that's something that we'd like you to share with all.
Okay. The one common underlying theme you will see in all of these is that, and I think Hemant referred to it at one point, so it's nice to have a goal that you want to get to. But he said, rest assured, you will not, that goal will change. And therefore, the one thing I have truly believed in my life is, because these are questions which you get asked at the job interview. So where do you think you will be in 5 years' time? And I would think, as a Dumbo, if I knew that, I wouldn't be here. I'd be getting on. And I'm saying the downside of saying, this is what I want to be, this is where I wish to reach, is that you will give up every opportunity which will come your way along the way. And I think I have been fortunate that I've kept myself open. I've been given opportunities, been able to take them. And exactly what happens in any of these. Like when I talked about Gyan Prakash, we started off as a remedial learning center for 2 hours for kids from government schools in 2 rooms which some school was willing to give us. From there, we learned that if you have a different pedagogy, which again we took from someone else, because that was the other objective in my life, is don't go inventing. Okay? There are enough wheels around the place. You don't need to have another one. Someone has it, take it, implement it. Implementation and execution is the factor for success, not design. There are enough things which have been done. So from there, we went off to this Taluka, Khed Shivapur, went up, and we said we will develop something for the schools. Where do you get your teachers from? So the thought was, okay, we will need to train the people in the village. And I said, forget it, no training. But the person who set this up, he had told me that there's a fantastic entity in Lucknow called Nalanda, which does great teacher training and teacher evaluation. So I said, just talk to the guy and get him over. The CEO was more than happy to come over. He spent 5 days with us in those villages. We interviewed 50 women and selected 5. And you won't believe it, but out of those 5, 2 of them happened to be B.Eds. They had Bachelor of Education degrees because they were from Pune. They got married and moved into the villages, and they were getting frustrated, not being able to use what they had. So we trained these 5 to become teachers. From there, you moved on so that somehow someone heard it in the government. We got the government Secretary of Education to come and visit us. No, this is in Maharashtra, Gyan Prakash, I'm saying. That went on saying, okay, fine, you will take this whole Taluka, 250 schools. And the issue with scaling is your ability to say no. Okay? That's the biggest lesson. And I said to him, you will not take on 250 schools. You don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have human capacity to do it. We will take up 50 schools this year. We'll do a good job of it and then move on. And these 50 schools became the lab for us, the laboratory, where whatever we wanted to try, from the 5 schools to 50, we tried out whether the scaling is possible there, what are the downsides, what are the things we need to take care of. From there, we went on to 250 schools, and from there, we went on to 4 districts. Again, we said, sorry, can't do 4. But I know of another foundation which we can rope in. So they took on 2 and we took on 2. And that's the story. The similar thing now with the Isha Vidya, which set up these schools in Tamil Nadu. The objective was, how can we get good English medium education for people in the rural community? And I mean, it's an expensive model because, I mean, we also said that one of the things we pride ourselves on is the fact that we have the ability to play games and so on and so forth. We have playgrounds and so. In the rural areas, the government schools don't have this. So the design was that we will have some donor giving us at least 2 acres of land so that we have a playground where children can develop their non-academic skills, that they will study in the classroom, English medium, and so on. It is a great experiment. But for each of these, we needed between 4 and 5 crores. to set up each school. Not easy. But did it work? Yes, because I know I had personally gone and talked to one of the donors. She headed a foundation. I received her at the airport, drove her out to the school, and made my sales pitch all along, saying that these kids can speak to in English from the first grade onwards, they're great kids, and so on and so forth. So she reaches the school, the headmaster is waiting to receive her. She has no interest in meeting the headmaster. She walks into the second standard classroom, squats on the floor, and starts talking to the kids in English. And she was floored when the kids answered in English. Then she went to the sixth standard and started talking to them and questioning them about science and astronomy. And she was floored because they could answer those subjects in English. End of the day, we got 4.5 crores. Okay? But I think it's not a replicable model. This is not a model where we can say we'll go across and spread it. But what we realize that if we can't spread it to the larger community, who's reaching that larger community? It's the government schools. So we said that what we will now do instead is train the government teachers. So we've trained about 40,000 government teachers in Tamil Nadu. So as long as your objective is still the end student, one way of reaching is to set up your own schools. The other way is to enable someone else using existing infrastructure to do the same good job. So we've not gone beyond 7 schools. And I don't think it's a scalable model. But I think we've been able to do a much bigger and a better job by using existing infrastructure, existing capacity, and making the quality over there higher.
So you do say, of course, it's not okay. I mean, you're using the existing infrastructure. So that is something that you'd want to recommend. Say, maybe call it best practices for people who would want to do something similar. Use what is existing rather than build from scratch.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why would you want to put up another school 15 meters away and have it develop and this other one is lying empty? I mean, I don't think it makes sense to replicate, and for the foreseeable future, India is going to be a resource-constrained economy. We will never have enough money to do everything that we want. So why not use what we have? And it's not impossible. As long as you don't ask the government to pay for it, they will be willing to give it to you. Okay? The next challenge is how do you get the government to pay for some things, which is, I think, work in progress. And I think we've moved a little bit because when I go back to Teach for America model, in Teach for America, what they do is when they put the fellows in the government schools, the state pays the salaries of those fellows. In India, we pay for the salary of the fellows. Net result is that the guy comes out of IIT, sometimes out of IIM, and then we pay him, when we started, we paid him a glorious amount of 15,000, and then we allowed him to work for 18 hours, okay? So we didn't put a ban on how many hours he can work. So we said, if you work more hours, you'll get per hour lower rate, which is great, right? But then you test these guys out. So I think the models have to change. When I say adopt and adapt, this is what we did. We adapted that model. It doesn't work. We've been talking with the government saying there's a point in time when I think you will need to start funding it, because it's not that the government doesn't have money. There's enough money. Most government departments around March are sending money back to the central government because they have not utilized it. But they find it easier to spend it on infrastructure and hardware, not paying salaries, because then you get into, is he qualified, does he have a B.Ed, does he have this and that and so on and so forth. We can say no to many things, but I think it's possible that we'll work on it, we'll keep working with them, and at some point in time they'll start paying for the salaries. Yeah.
So, in fact, what you said leads us on to the next question, where, I mean, we think when we're talking of scaling up, we're talking of challenges for scaling up, we think of, this is something that we also, think very often at Tata Center, about the teams that, propel these projects forward or the ideas forward. How relevant has the composition of the team been for you when you have worked in different states, in different districts, in the field of primary
I
education?
think the one thing you'll realize with the not-for-profit sector is that it's driven by a leader who's passionate and committed beyond any corporate leader that you can find. They are driven by a passion. Working with them is not easy because they expect you to do the same thing that you do. So exhaustion is a common feature across all teams. But then they also attract these same people. These are, one of the CEOs that I work with, I say to her that you're not a chief executive officer, you're the chief evangelical officer. You're going out and evangelizing what needs to be done for our children. And I think that's what your job is. So building up a team, you will attract the same type of people as what you have. If you get a misfit, rest assured within a month, the misfit is gone. They cannot survive. It's a high pressure, high performance area. Significantly different than the corporate world. So you don't have backups and backups to the backups here. You're doing everything. You're up there. And you're out there in the field, on stage all the time. You're performing almost 7/24. So I think, yes, getting a good team is important, but I don't think I could hire McKinsey or any of the other consulting firms to tell me what the org structure should be, what should be the type of people. I think it happens. You will get the right people at the right time. I think getting people, for me, is not as important as making them into what you want them to be. And for that, you have to give them opportunities. You can't dictate too much. And I think these guys develop. So far, I think across the 4 different entities I work with, we've had no problem in attracting people or retaining people.
How big is your team? How
My
big?
team?
Yeah.
I don't have a team.
No, okay.
I'm a solo operator.
Let's look at let's look at these 4 districts in Maharashtra.
In Maharashtra,
Yeah.
would you believe it if I said we are less than 100? And this less than 100 today is not because they're out in the field, but if I can digress for a minute, let me say what we are trying out here is to see how can we impart education so that he can learn. It's not a question of imparting education now as much as it is about the learnability of the child. We fortunately came in touch with a gentleman who had spent time, 10 years or something, in Google Maps. And he'd been involved in developing Google Maps, okay? And after 10 years, he gave that up and went around the world and looked at 10,000 schools to see what was the common thing and what was being developed. And he's now set up another foundation to develop the same thing, what he calls a learning navigator. And the big difference is when you look at what do we want our students to do, everybody is able to tell you by grade 5 he should be able to read this and write sentences and do arithmetic. By grade 10 he should be doing this thing. Nobody cares about where the child is today. And his example was, he says, Google Maps can't do anything for you unless it knows where you are today. You need the present location. So we've got this learning navigator which will map out every child in every class to say, where do you stand? So instead of saying that this class is bad in maths, we can say, these 2 kids are good in division, those 4 kids are good in multiplication, and the remaining 10, 12 are good in addition and subtraction. So then you start having customized solutions for each of these. All of this is available on the net, and the teachers are downloading. So when I say I have a high respect for government teachers, it's because they use their networks to draw down and pull down this data and use it in the classroom. They're able to monitor each child's performance. That is now being uploaded so that the block education officer gets to see what is happening with the teachers. So your teacher assessment, your teacher training is now going to be systematized. From block education officer, it goes to the district education officer, and then so on and so forth. So it is possible to use technology. There's always the debate of, do you design your NGO with scale in mind, or do you design your NGO for what you can do and see whether you can scale it? And I don't think there is a ready answer, because I think each of these are very specific. I think if you have a standardized scaling model from the beginning, unfortunately, many of them have started, they're not technology enabled as much as technology driven. And to my mind, I think there is a huge difference. I think using technology to enable what you're doing on the ground is critical. And I think because the ground realities are supreme. There are some projects which don't lend themselves to scaling. And I think we need to recognize that. And if I can give you an example of outside education, in the CSR committee in one of the companies which I used to chair, we did multiple things because we worked in rural areas. And this was the period of ODF, okay? And we went into that community, and of course it had been declared as an ODF, and we didn't see a single toilet out there, okay? And the team came back and said, sir, we need this budget to be able to put up so many toilets. And I said, as long as I am the chairman, you're not getting 1 rupee to set up a single toilet. However, I'm willing to approve funds for you to go into the community and convince them why they need a toilet. Because otherwise, most of these toilets have become storages for grains and so on and so forth. I said, we need to use them. The other urban belief is that the biggest supporters of this would be women. After working for 15 months in that community, we found that the biggest resistance came from women, okay? I mean, while it is true, as Hemant said, that that has been the base for many of the rapes and so on and so forth, the women, when we asked them, why don't you want a toilet? They said, this is our community time. This is the time that the men are not around, because they go out in a group, okay? And they chat and they do everything. And they said, no men are around, and that's the best time of our day, okay? Now, if we don't understand that and say, I'm putting up a toilet, please start using it, it doesn't work. So it took us 15 months. Now, can I go and replicate this thing? Unless I understand the community and what their thought processes are, I can't. So you've got to take an idea and you've got to customize it for the local situation. What drives them? What engages them? And that's how it works. Yeah.
That brings us back to what we do at Tata Center as well, right? I am now opening this conversation to questions, because we are
Running out of time.
Yes.
Yes.
There are a few more questions, but I'm going to hold them on.
Okay.
Because, yes, I could see questions there. Yeah, please.
Only easy questions, please.
Why is education almost never an election issue?
Election issue.
Yeah. So why doesn't it become an election rallying issue?
It has been in a few elections where it is. But I think it's the question of demanding what the community wants. And I think we don't realize that not everything that the governments do or parliament does is bad. I mean, 2013, if I'm not mistaken, the first Right to Education Act was passed. And that Right to Education Act, in one of the lines in there, said that every school must have a school management committee. That school management committee in the rural areas is comprised of the parents, the community elders, the teachers, and so on and so forth. And that's been one of our bigger objectives, is working with the SMCs to start demanding things. When they start demanding, the teachers start responding. And I think that's how it works. So the community is asking for it. And I think that's a great way to do it. Big public issue, unfortunately, there are negative answers I can give you, where if you look at Karnataka, they will not permit government schools until last year, I think, of having English medium instruction. No government, and all of the ministers and all of the MLAs who voted for it have their kids in English medium schools and going abroad to study. But they don't want the masses to have it because they're much more difficult to handle if they're educated. So it's important to keep them at that level, okay?
Yeah, there's a question there.
Yep.
I think education and knowledge are mutually exclusive. Just because you're educated does not mean you're knowledgeable. So one, how do we cover that gap, no matter where we basically take this? My second thing is that it's great that you are able to identify which child is good at what, whether they're great at maths or science or addition and subtraction. But how do we focus on making them a holistic, good human beings? Are we looking at mindfulness? Are we looking at consciousness? Their conscience? Are we looking at a value system that the child is also imbibed with? That is the second thing. The third thing is the kind of region that you are engaged in. I think there is a lot of collective ancestral wisdom that these communities hold. And that is natural knowledge that a family passes on to their children. Is it happening that the education system is focused so much on what it teaches that it is replacing that knowledge? Or is there a way that they both can be combined so that a child grows holistically, knowing what the ancestral wisdom has been passed to them through generations and what the new modern education is offering them? Thank you.
Brilliant. The first thing, when you said educated and having knowledge, education and knowledge are two different things. I would beg to differ, because I think unless you mean that once I get my degree, that I'm educated, and I have a major difference of opinion on that. You may get a degree, but you're still uneducated. I think what you're referring to education is, does that child have the social consciousness to be a good citizen of the country? Are we doing enough in that field? I don't think so. There are other NGOs which are working on bringing in consciousness and bringing in social values, social customs out there. The problem is the third one, where I think parents have outsourced their child's education to the school. They believe that it is their responsibility only to go and question the schools and the teachers, that they have no responsibility to provide the same learning environment at home. And I think that's where I have a challenge. I think we need to take on responsibilities as parents to be able to educate the child in the value systems that we wish them to have. Today, it is going to get tougher, because in my time, I was exposed to my family. Today, the children are exposed to the external world significantly more than to the family. Because once the family, then the parents are themselves traveling around there on their phone, they're doing everything, and the kid has got exposed to all of the other social media. So the pressure, the peer pressure is much, much higher. In spite of that, I believe that parents have a responsibility to do this thing. Teachers can't do it. Teachers should not be doing it.
Yeah, you have a question here.
Hi,
Please.
I'm a faculty here. So I also work with the Tata Center. One of the things you had mentioned was that you have to reuse existing infrastructure and then roll out your stuff within the thing. I mean, that's a very valid statement, but some of the things which we find difficult, which you kind of glossed over, you made it sound very easy at least, is that suppose, let's say we have something which we want the government to adopt, right? In spite of meeting a lot of people with an IIT tag, I mean, I'm saying IIT itself has a pretty good brand, and you do get appointments and you are able to meet with the relevant people. Still, it has been a very uphill task to use whatever the government already has. The same thing applies not just with government. Like, for example, if you have something you want to use in schools or in colleges, and then the principals have to get on board, everything that requires a change, which is like a status quo, and even though no matter how much you say your thing will improve, but if it is going to be more work, more effort, something even incremental thing from their side, there is a resistance to adopt it. So how do you get around this how do you get them on board to your ideas when there is a lot of resistance from them? I mean, what are the...
The only thing that has helped me personally is to make sure that they don't feel threatened by me. I think that is important. Even when you're asking, the question is, what is in it for that person? Why would he say yes? And that's what we need to see. I mean, it's not, if I get this thing, I will be able to do this thing. The question is, if that person was to give it to me, how would he perform his role? I think it's never easy, okay? Frankly, the last 11 years, I've been out of practice in doing anything. I only give gyan now, okay? And I have other people who will do the implementation. And it's so much better, I tell you. I wasted 30 years of my life. I shouldn't have done that. If only someone had guided me, just go give gyan. But I think it's not easy. There is no easy answer to it. It's just persistence and perseverance. If you believe in it, it will happen. And I think all of these NGOs that I'm working with, they've not had an easy ride. I mean, I think the way I answered it, it felt like everything fell into place one after the other. It wasn't. Because there are challenges. But I think because you're passionate about it, you will find a way. You will be able to find a way to convince the other side. Beyond that, these nice words, I really can't give you anything more specific.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question.
I might want to say that I think world over the school education is kind of getting outdated now because it's only creating more and more jobless youth. The whole idea is kind of move towards both soft skills as well as hard skills. And that I think is pretty easy to scale rather than the school education because that's getting outdated. So are the NGOs that you're working with kind of adapting to this changing paradigm?
Oh, absolutely. The Gyan Prakash Foundation, where we talked about this learning navigator, we are testing it out. We've done the testing over the last 6 months with 30 teachers, and we've implemented that in the 2 districts now. We've taken on 2 more districts. All of the material, because the learning navigator is just an enabler. Behind that, what goes is the competency mapping. It's not what you teach, it's what are the competencies you want that child to develop. So to develop that competency, what is the input that you need to give? And when you give that input, you need to be able to test it to see whether that competency has been acquired or not. So the whole thing goes in. We've done this thing right now in Marathi and in Hindi. In Hindi, we are working with the government of Jharkhand to implement this in 2 districts. If it works well successfully there, we've got the whole Hindi heartland available to us. So scaling can happen. But scaling, and I would agree that one of the worst things which has been done to mankind is the development of Excel. Okay? It's so easy to change one criteria and say this can happen. I mean, I don't think you can develop education with the press of a button. With all due respects to the brilliant people in Niti Aayog, 65, 70 years that didn't do anything about education. Now, one of the foundations that I'm involved with, they got involved in these aspirational district program. And Niti Aayog wants a report from them every day on what the child has learned. 70 years, you didn't bother about checking out what the child learned. The only thing you did was make sure that he went from grade 1 to 2 to 3 without testing, because you wanted to make sure that everybody went through school. Now you're saying, I want him to measure every day. I know, I can't tell you end of the day today what I learned, but I can make sure that at the end of the month, there's a possibility of you being able to assess what I learned. So I'm saying that measurements cannot be done. The time frame in which you measure the performance is also important. What you're making available through MOOCs and all of the others is a technology. How we implement it is again going to change on the ground level. So as I said, I mean, one way to do this thing, and I think we talked about it once, is can we or can Gyan Prakash go across the country? Most definitely not. I mean, they have no ambitions, no aspirations. Whatever we have developed here is available to anyone else in any part of the country. We're more than happy to even send some of our leaders out there to work with you so you can implement it out there. There are platforms which have been created. I mean, I know Nandan Nilkani has set up something called Ek Step. Okay? So all of the development that we do in the pedagogy, we port it onto Ek Step. We do it in Marathi in Maharashtra. They will translate it into all the other languages and make it available to anyone in any school, anywhere in the country. I think those solutions are where technology plays an important role. But you can't forget, at the end of the day, you're dealing with a child. And children who come from different backgrounds, that, please, don't dehumanize it. Don't.
We will have to stop. One last question, please, because we're running late now.
Hi. So
There are two of you.
basically,
Okay, one after, please. Yes.
okay.
Thank you.
So I have a two-part question. The first is around like a mindset. So I work at a corporate. So what would you say is like a mindset change in terms of working for like a structured sort of environment where you work at a corporate versus here in a social sector where everything is much more unstructured and uncertain? And more so on the second question is that, so we here are designing technology solutions to the problems, right? So based on your experience, how much would you say has it been that it is actually a tech problem to solve, or is it more of a social problem that we need to address at a, like in terms of the amount of effort that requires to be done? Is it like more on the tech side, or would you say more on the social side?
The first question regarding the mindset. If you're asking about how I transitioned, it wasn't very difficult because I'm basically a born lazy guy. So even in the corporate world, I made sure that I had people working. Because as I always said to them, I said, listen, each of us need to do that which we are good at. Okay? I'm good at receiving awards. So you do the work and I will go and receive the award. I make very good speeches when receiving awards. So give me the opportunities. So transiting from there, the mindset is of enabling people to deliver. If you had it in the corporate world, which is absolutely essential, because I think today people like me don't know enough of all the developments which have happened in the last 30, 40 years. So I cannot really guide anyone, but I can guide someone who can develop things on their own. So enablement is key, and that's what you'll need in the social sector. The second question was about technology. I think I did talk about it earlier, that it is technology enabled, not technology driven. For God's sake, don't be like many of the startups who come up with solutions and then go looking for a problem, okay? They've got a solution, but they don't know what problem it can solve. So technology enablement, absolutely, I'm all for it, because that's what will help you to be able to make it available to many more people. But don't be driven by that.
Very useful. Thank you for sharing. Could benefit some more. What are your views on structured versus unstructured contribution? So I am coming from a background of running a social project. On weekends, I do a project called Nanna Sitara. Our observation is the government is trying, the private sector is trying, the NGOs is trying, and yet there's a whole sense of urgency missing across the country to solve the problem. So what are your views of on the unstructured or the citizen-driven movement to solve this education problem? We are kind of struggling with it in terms of consistency, but if you have come across any good models as to how the entire citizen community can be engaged, and I mean, in your experience, whatever you can share so that we can actually solve this in 5 years rather than 50 years.
Okay. I don't think it's an either-or situation. Is it structured versus unstructured? I don't think so. But there are things which, when you're dealing at the community level, when you're dealing with the society, it will be unstructured, because there is no guarantee of when you give this input, what the output is going to be. What is the reaction going to be? So I think you will need to have people in the team who are comfortable with unstructured environments. Having been able to deal with that, when you're talking about scaling up, you will need to have certain structures in place. You will need to have certain processes in place. Don't get them hard-coded. you need to leave a lot of enablement at the ground level. And I think the other day I was reading up, and I think they've, without offending anyone or anything, or saying this is not becoming religion, but they said there are two ways in which scaling up can happen. One is the using the Catholicism way, and the second is the Buddhism way. In Catholicism, they say that there are preordained ideas and concepts which will be pushed down the line. In the Buddhist way, what they say is that what they will do is help you with the mindset change and then enable you to make the changes on the ground and action on the ground. So one is, these are the ideas, take them from me, I am God, implement. The other side is saying, hey, I will help you to change the mindset. Go out there, look at what the realities are, and then develop it.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satwalekar. It's been wonderful sitting and chatting. There are plenty of questions, but time. Thank you, audience, for your questions. Keep them coming. Mr. Satwalekar is here with us for the rest of the day, I hope. So if you have questions, you can meet him over tea, coffee, and the rest of the day. We are now breaking for tea. It's a 10-minute break. There is Ruvi who's coming up here with the question that just went on the app. And it says, what is the number of English medium schools working with Gyan Prakash, not with Gyan Prakash, working in Tamil Nadu? That's one. The other one. Gyan Prakash worked with which of the following organizations in primary education? Please feel free to tap in your responses because they are they're adding up to our surveys, to our count of how many of you are actually interacting with us on the app. Thank you for following us. We are now breaking for tea for 10 minutes. We're back here for our first panel discussion. Panelists, I'll just come and meet you. Thank you, Mr. Satwalekar. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.